In this regard, I'm very honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Helga Nowotny. Professor Nowotny is a Professor Emerita of Social Studies of Science, ETH Zurich, and a founding member of the European Research Council, or ERC, which funds basic research in the European Union. And from 2010 to the end of 2013, she has been the president of the ERC. Professor Nowotny holds a PhD in sociology from Columbia University, New York, and a doctorate in jurisprudence from University of Vienna. In her long and distinguished career, she has published more than 300 articles in scientific journals. She has written on diverse topics from innovation, the sociology of sciences, to genetics. And she's also a member of various advisory boards and trustees in Austria, France, Germany, Netherlands, UK, among others. Among the prizes and awards she has received is the J.D. Bernal Prize for Lifelong Achievements in Science, Technology and Society, and doctorates honoris causa from several European universities. And in November 2013, she received a doctor honoris causa at the Weizmann Institute of Science. Her professional career has taken her into various fields of science, and she has spoken on diverse topics from research, ecosystems, innovation, complexity to the impact of science on society. She's also a staunch believer of empowering universities and research institutes, giving them the space of autonomy and scientific independence they need to pursue their aims. Her latest book, together with the molecular biologist Giuseppe Testa, titled Naked Genes, Reinventing the Human in the Molecular World, or in the Molecular Age, is worth a read for those of you interested in the advances in the molecular life sciences and their profound impact on society. Ladies and gentlemen, I can therefore think of no better person than Professor Nowotny to address us today on this topic, where she can share her perspectives of some of the most pressing scientific challenges that confront every discipline today, particularly in this day and age where everything seems to be moving faster, more interconnected, and in non-linear ways, from dot-com bubbles, financial contagions, to global pandemics. Following her presentation, we'll have a chance to engage Professor Nowotny in a Q&A session if we have time, which I'm sure will be as interesting as engaging as her presentation. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor Nowotny for her keynote address. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, thank you very much, Dr. Tan, for this very kind and generous introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be back to Singapore. I was a participant and speaker at the conference in March last year, and it's very encouraging to see that Nanyang Technical University has become a place in which the social scientists and the natural scientists mix and mingle freely, and where new initiatives such as this conference and the thinking and projects that go with it are behind. I have chosen as a title for my presentation, The Embarrassment of Complexity. Now, why should complexity embarrass us? Is it not something that we are very proud of finally getting to master in seeing the connections that help us to cope with complexity? Well, we are certainly trying to cope with complexity, but at times it just overwhelms us. And the embarrassment comes in when we realize that the old structures that we are so familiar with are no longer adequate. They are no longer up to the new tasks and to the fast-changing environment in which adaptation is being called forth all the time. And the new structures are not there as yet. We have the feeling new structures are emerging, but we are not quite sure as yet where they are, how they will come about, how they will fit with the old structures. So, and this gives us the feeling that we are in a phase of transition, which always from physics to the social life transition phases are exciting, they are risky, but they can also be embarrassing. Now, as we all know, one of the reasons why we feel this overwhelming complexity, at least from time to time, is that we are witnessing this enormous acceleration of connections all over. The spread of information, the density of information, the spatial extension of information, access to new kinds of users, to information, sharing, and so on, are all the driving forces. But it's neither technology per se, nor is it globalization per se that are the cause, but it's the underlying structures, the non-linear dynamic phenomena that are the root and are the basis of complexity. And all this is being played out at different speeds and at different scales. So managers, decision makers, and we are all at times managers and decision makers, this means that this feeling of embarrassment that we have to do as if we could master complexity, as if we could see the whole when we see only parts of the whole. We have to act as if we are in command all the time, although we see that issues escape our grasp and our understanding. So this is the feeling that the neat separation of categories that are useful, that we are also used to, sometimes fall short of the real world complexity. But of course, this feeling of being overwhelmed has been with people for a long time. Every manager of any organization has been forced to cope with complexity, and there are several strategies of reducing complexity. And one strategy consists in simplifying as much as you can, and according to Einstein's famous dictum, simplify things as much as possible, but not more, which is good advice, but it's difficult to practice. And so one way of reducing complexity consists in having fewer variables and in looking at the direct cause-effect relations, but as we know, this will not get us very far. With the rise of computation and modeling, we have also at our disposal a whole new range of support tools that have been used widely and that are becoming used much more widely. And every academic knows what I'm talking about if I speak about the numerical reduction of complexity. We rely on indicators based on citation patterns, etc., and everywhere else decision makers start to rely on algorithms, on numbers, on indicators, without very often being aware that an indicator, as the Latin root of the word testifies, only indicates, it points to something, and it can never capture the whole. And this numerical reduction of complexity has its own eigendynamic. This is a German word that I like to use it just like Eigenwert. It is a dynamics of its own, and it has something that social scientists call performativity, which means if you set up a numerical indicator, people will tend to perform the way how you expect them to perform. But this is very often not really what you would really like them to do. It constrains creativity, it limits the options because you are setting your eyes on the numerical goal only. And again, I think everyone in the audience here has many examples of your own to understand what I mean. And this over-reliance, of course it is useful. Numerical complexity reduction saves time, it does reduce complexity, but it also has one of the unintended consequences that are so important when we speak about complexity. Namely, it limits the capacity of human judgment. And therefore, one of the warnings that whenever we encounter this trend towards numerical complexity reduction, we have to keep in mind is where is the place of human judgment when it is indispensable to cultivate the sense of human judgment. And as I say here, whatever numbers or graphs we use, whatever indicators we use, they speak not to themselves, by themselves, but they speak to those who know how they have been constructed and who know how to interpret them. So this embarrassment of complexity should push us forward towards what at the conference in March was called integrative thinking. It should also make us more humble, because we are forced to consider the limits of what can be predicted and when, and especially to be much more aware of the power of unintended consequences, especially of human action. Let me just give you one example. In this new world where information has become the new raw material, the new way in which we feel we have a new resource at our disposal that we collect, that we transform, that we work with all the time, information. The more information we share, the more information we have access to, one of the unintended consequences is that it poses the new problem of how to allocate credit and blame between individuals and collectivities. If you have shared work, and we all are for collaboration and sharing work, some of the old rules that you have for allocating credit, giving merit and reputation to those to whom it is due become blurred. How are you going to change, to let a new system of credit and blame come about? And blame, mistakes are being made. How are we going to distinguish between mistakes that are being made by individuals, and we all make mistakes, but we also have a human tendency to say mistakes have been made, but not by us, not by me. And institutions, organizations make mistakes, but again, they have a tendency to blame others in having caused their mistakes. So this is just one example of many of unintended consequences that arise of this way of sharing information and of having access to new information. Another very important aspect of this move towards the requirement of more integrative thinking has to do with seeing the world, seeing a problem from different perspectives. And this means to be open to different evolutionary ways of systems to move on. It means to be open towards synthesis, synergy, sometimes synchronicity. Thank you very much. And the syllable that is shared, syn, in Greek means together. So synthesis is you put things together in the basis of what you want to say. Synergy, you put your energies together, and synchronicity sometimes. It is very important to be aware of what needs to be done at the same time. And all this requires a much stronger sense of being part of the whole. Now, let me come to the theme of this conference here today, complexity, encountering cultural heritage. I'm probably the only person in the room here who has not been working on cultural heritage, in cultural heritage, except as a citizen and as a consumer of cultural heritage. But I'm very much interested in the phenomena and in the processes of innovation. And I think cultural heritage poses in quite a unique way the problem and the challenge of innovation in a new way. There is the inherent tension between innovation, the drive to create the new, and again, we live in a world in which policymakers everywhere prize innovation. The European Union has an innovation union pronounced now. Everywhere else, governments, policymakers are bent on bringing the university and research world together with the business work to spur up and to accelerate innovation. And at the same time, the more innovation we have, the more the question arises what to do with what is superseded by all this new stuff, the new ways of doing, the new ways of looking at the world. What is happening to what was there before? Of course, there's obsolescence. Things just pass away, they disappear, they are superseded. But there are also interesting ways in which the new builds on the old, in which the new integrates the old. And so my way of approaching this tension is to look at it how, again, this tension, what kind of problems does it throw up? How are we dealing with this tension? How can we deal better with this inherent tension? So there's the pressure of the new in terms of volume, size, the rate of innovation, the impact of innovation, and at the same time, the trend to conserve, preserve what we value highly. And instead of having a seemingly solid, unchanging block or chunk of the past which we value and which we wish to preserve, we have to see the way how changes in context must be taken into account if we want to preserve this part of the past. There's also the tension between the cult of the original, which very often is said to be a Western obsession with the original, while in other cultures, non-Western cultures, the original is valued less highly. There's the tendency to search for authenticity, and this implies less tolerance of ambiguity and ambivalence. And then, as part of the overall cultural baggage, we also all have this imagined origins. When Benedict Anderson, long time ago, wrote his classical book about imagined communities, he was right on to something that is part of the way how we imagine the past. The past, indeed, is a foreign country, and we can only approach it up to a certain point because we lack the way of thinking that the people living in the past had. So we can never live it completely, but there is this imagination, and depending on how much room we give to this imagination, the outcome is going to vary. Look at this little object here. It's dated approximately, so here you have some leeway in dating, 1504, which means past Columbus discovering America, and it's a small ostrich egg. Beautiful object. What does it tell us about the makers, about the way how people saw the world? Now, the sense of the past, and this is also shown very well in the icon that you have chosen for the conference, has a genealogical thread in it. There is the grandparent or the parent handing on to the next generation. It comes from somewhere, we pass it on to somewhere. But we also have to adjust and to account for the way how this past and whatever we want to transmit takes on new meanings and is broadened and expanded. It's no longer only the classical monuments, the well-preserved stones, or what has been written on stones, important as it is in terms of resources, and lets us glimpse into the past. We have come to study rituals, ideas, institutions, however partial our understanding of this is. Material and immaterial culture are being brought together in a much closer way than in the past. And this means also the artificial and the natural, the way how humans impacted on their environment and the environment impacted on whatever they did. And we are also beginning, finally, to be open to the influence of different cultures on each other, and we are moving towards cross-cultural comparisons at a rate that has been unprecedented compared to the past. We also have to overcome the tradition-modernity distinction with all its association. Modernity either is something that is being aspired to or being condemned. Tradition is something that is highly prized or that is looked at being backwards. And we have also to be aware of the normative dimension of history. This goes from the Golden Age, a wonderful notion that everything was better when it started and we are deteriorating, to the so-called lessons that history, in my opinion, does not teach us. I once happened to get a small guided tour at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin when I was a guest at Wissenschaftskollegin in Berlin. And the Pergamon Museum, like many other museums in the world, has adopted a practice which at that time was new to me. The person in charge of the restoration explained to us that in a particular object that he was restoring, the restoration is done in a way so that every step of the restoration is reversible. And this impressed me very much, because it shows a respect for the past and at the same time a confidence and openness towards the future. And the reasoning is a very simple one. There may be new findings, there will be new discoveries, and therefore, instead of gluing the pieces together in a certain way that only are based on the knowledge of that very day when you do it, you must leave it open for future findings, for future interpretations. And I think this, at the same time, this principle of reversibility is a recognition of the discontinuity in findings. Every archaeologist knows how many discontinuities, and all of a sudden new discontinuities come up, the fragmentation and so on. And it also goes back to something that Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, said some time ago. We have no knowledge about how our future knowledge is going to evolve. And I think the principle of reversibility captures this very nicely. Let me show you now a somewhat different example from my Berlin experience. This is work that is being done in Japan's National Institute of Advanced Industrial Design and Technology. And as you know, the Japanese are very fond of robots. And so in this particular case, they have written a software of a dance, but it's a classical Japanese dance. You don't recognize it because the Japanese dances, their shapes and their movements are very different from what a robot can do, and so is the impression on us. But nevertheless, here you have a way of merging the idea of a classical dance that wants to be and should be preserved with a robotic group of dancers, and the software corrects itself if a position is coming up that is mechanically not stable. Another example, and this is a tribute to our Italian friends here in the audience, and they have left us a cultural heritage of the Napolitanian pizza. And again, this is a robot, and believe me, to make a robot do a pizza is a very complex undertaking based on very complex algorithms. And so what this pizzaiolo does, it makes a pizza, as you see here, it makes the dough, it has a shovel, puts it into the oven, and lo and behold, the pizza comes out. So again, this is an example of merging a very complex scientific and engineering solution with something that people can relate to and that preserves some kind of heritage. Another example comes from an NSF-funded cyber-enabled Discover and Innovation Program grant. And again, like other examples in the world, it's about bringing cultural heritage to life and seeing the past through the lens of the present. I would like to call it curating the past, which means keeping alive the interest. And the interest can be aesthetic, it can be cultural, it can be scholarly interest, it can be social interest in the past, because of the belief it will be of interest also in the future. And so curation is about collecting, organizing, sorting of the past in the present context for the future uses. But the problem here, of course, is what to select, how to select, for whom, with whom to select, and what do we know about future uses. The word relevance has already been mentioned today. And I would like to take it up in the Latin sense again, to lift out something. But it's interesting to see that the search engines, and we all use search engines when we open and look at the app on our iPhone, it means the capability of the search engine or of a function of the engine to retrieve material or data that satisfy the need of the users. And the need of the users are changing, and we have to anticipate somehow, difficult or impossible as it may sound, to anticipate somehow what will be relevant for the for the needs of the future users. So this means, and here I want to link it with what I said at the very beginning about the importance of keeping and cultivating the ability of human judgment to know why something matters, also for the future, and how it is important, to make the hidden connections visible and marked absences present. The reduction of complexity and the criteria of selection therefore imply to look for the relevance of the past for today and to anticipate somehow the relevance for the future. Now, values, even if we think they don't change, they do change. Societies over time have developed very different kinds of values, taking things for granted in the way how a social order is being played out or how society is organized. If we refer to ancient Greece and Rome, sort of as the classical examples, we feel extremely familiar, at least in Europe, with ancient Romans and Greeks. And yet we do not realize that had we been projected backwards in time, we would find some aspects of the society utterly strange, if not repulsive, namely the fact that it was based on slavery. Slavery was omnipresent, and neither the economy nor the social order could have functioned in those times without slavery. So there you have one value that has changed in the world completely. And therefore, we should not fall into the trap of thinking we can know what future values will be. And yet, we have to anticipate why it is important, what it is important, what is important. And then there is something that David Edgerton, historian of technology, called the shock of the old. And in this book, he gives numerous examples of how the old is still with us. If you think of the design of a car, it was based on the design of coaches, horse-drawn coaches that preceded the car manufacturer. And there are numerous examples of this kind, and design is a very good way of entering here, because you can lift it out. It has a certain functionality that is embedded in it. You can lift it out, transfer it to a new context with new materials and with new functions as well. So on the practical side, and this is the last part of my presentation, on the practical side, the question comes then to how to select with whom and for whom. Let's remind ourselves that what we call culture and cultural identity arises from interaction of people over time. Culture is nothing but coming out, emerging from interaction of people over time and in interacting with their environment, with each other. And this means that, of course, we want to listen to the voices of the past. We want to find ways of communicating also with those who made objects before us, because we are curious, we are interested in the way how they solved their problems, whatever guidance we may get from them, but also because we feel it's part of the human chain of being. And as I alluded to before, we have now a much wider, much more encompassing, much more complex understanding of how artwork and artifacts are interrelated, how the natural environment is transformed by humans, but also transforms societies when it hits in unexpected ways, how belief systems are part of every cultural system, lifestyles, and so on. So it's appreciation of the complexity of cultural heritage itself that makes us look in a much more integrative way at people and things, artifacts and ideas, high and low culture, the sacred and the profane. Now, with whom and for whom we have come a long way from what you see here, museums and zoos in history being a preserve for the privileged, now being opened for all citizens. And many research projects are very much aware and are at the forefront, I would say, of what is called citizen science, involvement of citizens in the way how research is being done. And this is one of the great advantages of cultural heritage, not only that it allows natural scientists, social scientists, and humanists to get together, but also to involve the public from day one, because there is an interest, a very keen interest of the public in the past. And if we are able to involve people through this enormous range that is at our disposal now, interactive games, visualization tools, letting people, children, for instance, in school, reconstruct some of the objects of the past. These are great ways of involving them in research activities. And this also allows new ways of letting the scientific imagination and disciplined ways of working merge, mixing art, science, design, ICT. There is a great future for heritage science. Now, here I will just skip through this. We are also, for the first time, I think, evolving a sense for global history, entangled histories, as some historians called it, being no longer interested only in a nationalistic way of looking at the past, but seeing the entanglements, the way how boundaries were always crossed, and the way how entanglement means you had perceptions from the outside that differed sometimes markedly from those inside, and what it teaches us today with the benefit of historical distance. Now, let me take a crude look at the whole, the title of the March conference, and move to an even cruder look at the future. The future is unknown. The future is always uncertain, but with heritage providing us a unique vantage point to look back to the past, and yet to be able to have a glimpse at the future. And this future is open and evolving. We do not know what it has in store for us, and therefore it is important, just as my Berlin restaurator in the Pergamon, to keep reversibility in our own beliefs, in our own ways of seeing a possibility, to allow ambiguity and ambivalence, to allow a creative mixture, and to allow hybrids, because this is how the world evolved through hybridization, and the same is true for the cultural world. And therefore, there is a need for creating contemporary spaces for consensus and not to aim for final understandings, which will not get us very far. So the complexity of curating cultural heritage, it's never complete, never totally coherent. There are contradictions. There is this inherent tension with innovation, what to throw out deliberately, what will just be destroyed, what we regret and do not want to be destroyed. The tension also with how much and in which way, and how to take account of the changing contexts and the way how we perceive now something that leaves it open for future interpretation as well. And the younger generation, which is the generation to which we want to transmit the world as partly shaped by us, has developed a new lifestyle and a new working style. And it's this fantastic mixture of learning, of working, of playing and creating together. So I wish you here at Nanyang all the best to this great future for heritage science and complexity that is starting with this conference. Thank you very much.
I know it's almost time for tea break, but I'm quite sure that many of you are actually very keen to ask Professor Nowotny some questions, and she has very kindly agreed to give you some time and space to engage here in an interactive discussion, because that would really be along the lines of what you actually presented earlier about the need for more collaborative discussions and interaction with the audience, and I think that's where the real learning and the real insights start to come to the fore. So I would suggest that you keep your questions short and concise, and identify where you're from, and and we'll try and take as many questions as we can without sacrificing your tea break. So, who would like to take the floor? Yes, the gentleman at the back.
Hi, Enrico Marsili, School of Biological Sciences, NTU. The question is related, since I'm not a social scientist, but I'm interested in this connection between complexity and social science and technology. Can we really learn a lot from how past technological problem was solved? I'm not fully sure, especially at least in our field, because we tend to learn from the solution immediately before our current development. If we look at 10 years in the past, in any solution regarding ICT or even biology, we tend to see things that are really just outdated. So I agree that there is some interaction with the past and with the people that designed the previous solution, but that's sort of limited framework.
Biology and looking back at the history of biology. And here it varies from discipline to discipline. I still think that the life sciences have something to learn from going back to the past, in the sense that you see what has been tried, what has been superseded, and it gives you a sense of not being completely overconfident that you have now found the solution that may turn out very soon to be superseded again by another solution. Science does not give you certainty. Science gives you certainty up to a point, but every scientist knows his or her work can be superseded tomorrow. So it's always a temporary certainty that you have. And going back in history makes you more humble, and it makes you more aware of what were the alternatives that were tried. But there's one discipline in particular where I very much regret that the teaching of its history has been abolished practically in all major universities, and that's the history of economics. The history of economics was taught as part of the curriculum, and it was called dogma history. And what economists learned in the old days was what major thinkers, Ricardo and Adam Smith and others and Walras and so on, had been come up as solution to very concrete problems of that day related to the fall or rise of grain prices, whatever it was, very concrete economic real-world problems. And they came up with interesting and very rich theoretical and empirical solutions, which was part of the curriculum of teaching economics. This has been abolished. It has been replaced by mathematics, which is an important part of every discipline, I would say. But it came at a great loss, because part of the crisis we had, if you look at what economists have been unable to diagnose, to analyze, I'm not speaking about predictions, but about the analysis, getting to the root of the problem. Part of it could have been avoided by knowing the history of economic thought and the way how certain problems had been tackled. So I would say it's domain specific. You may learn less in the life sciences, but I think nevertheless, you know, it sharpens your awareness of what others were trying to do, and it makes you more humble, and it guards you of being overconfident.
Thank you. I think this, in a way, also underscores the current revival in terms of behavioral economics and behavioral insights, the sort of recognition that men can be, and women for that matter, can be rational as well as irrational. It doesn't lend itself to simple economic theorems. But I see that there are some other hands that were raised early on. Is there someone else who has a question to ask? Ah, yes, that's right. Gentleman at the back.
Hi. Ian Chong, NUS. So I was quite curious about the slide that you skipped over where you talked about avoiding dichotomies in ideology between, I think, conservation and modernization. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what you mean there. And also, I guess, another area where I'm quite curious is you sort of skirt around the role of the citizen. So I'm wondering if you could sort of flesh out for me, what roles do citizens or can citizens play in terms of heritage protection, in terms of working with complexity, especially in places where the role of the state is overwhelming? Thank you.
Sorry, could I just ask your name and where you're from?
As I said earlier, Ian Chong in US.
In US, okay.
Sorry, I did not understand the first.
Okay. You had the first part of the question, which could you just put it across to us again? I think the second part of the question, you quite understand that, but it's just the first part that we're trying to understand.
Well, the first part actually goes to a slide that the presentation had skipped over, talking about the need to avoid ideologies, the need to avoid dichotomies. And so it went over quite fast, so I was hoping that I could hear more about that particular element in the presentation. Thank you.
I think every ideology puts up blinders, and you see things in a certain way. And I think in a globalized world, we don't need more blinders, we need more openness to different perspectives. And we also need to develop a new capacity, how to integrate different perspectives. This is what this integrative thinking is all about. And there is no magic formula for doing that. It's not just a mixture, putting ingredients in a pot and stirring it and something comes up, but being aware of how different perspectives can enrich also our sense. I was speaking about attention. Now, there are also many contradictions in life. There are contradictions also between values. And to understand, to have a better understanding that this is part of the way how society functions. There are tensions that need to be managed. There are contradictions in our own life, in the life of society, and how to integrate these different perspectives. So I hope that I've sort of answered roughly what the first part. The involvement of citizens in research is a very important new kind of movement, opening up science and research not only with the finished end products. You know, it's nice to have exhibitions with beautiful, you know, end products that people can marvel at. But I think it's very important to let citizens appreciate and to sharpen their understanding of how research is actually conducted. And research is inherently uncertain. In basic research, you don't know the outcome as yet. You have a goal, you know approximately the direction, but you don't know what you will find on the way. You mentioned serendipity. Yeah. Serendipity is a very, very important ingredient in doing research. And if you are open, serendipity simply means that you are discovering a new phenomenon or a new connection that you were not looking for, but you are clever enough to realize its importance. And this way of letting citizens participate and getting a better understanding. Research also means you fail sometimes. You know, your experiment does not work out the way you do. You have to start, go back again and start again. This is part of the process of doing research, persistence. Let me just give you one example that of one of these projects. It's not about cultural heritage, it's more about the life sciences. This is a friend of mine in Paris, who has started to work with school teachers and with schools with children from disadvantaged background. And it's very cheap. What he does with the school teacher, he puts up in the class a box with ants. and a glass cover on top of the, of the box. And now the children are induced into doing research by observing what are the ants doing. You put an obstacle to where they want to go back into their hole. So how do they go around the obstacle? How many of them? Some go somewhere else. So you teach them with a very simple way to observe, then to analyze what have they been doing. It continues, you have to write up what you have been observing and analyzing, and then you start to compare with another class that did the same kind of very simple observational experiment. And so this is, in my view, a very good way of getting these kids that otherwise have no relation whatsoever to what research is. They come from homes where the word research is not even understood or known. And yet now they know I have to be patient, I have to be persistent, I have to be very accurate in describing what I see, I have to make sense of the pattern I have observed, I can compare it, then I can take a photograph, I can send it to my classmates in another class, etc., etc. And there are many examples of this kind where you can bring children in, but also computer-savvy adults. The folded experiment is a very famous one in the life sciences, where amateurs outside, working outside of labs, have been able to find a solution to how a particular protein folds that has escaped or would have taken much longer. This is something that already Kepler, way back in the 16th century, said the observation astronomers have always relied on amateurs and citizens helping them, because it goes much faster, but it also induces this closeness to research. And I think cultural heritage is a wonderful site where you can bring in citizens to do research with you, to let them participate in showing them what you do. And this will then reinforce their particular sense of the value of things that you want to preserve, an understanding of why it needs to be preserved. And also, you will have new ways of blending with these new contexts.
I think that's a very profound insight into the two questions that you've asked, and very quickly, I would say that one is precisely what you were alluding to right at the end of your presentation, that because the current realities is that everyone can be a political commentator, everyone can be a journalist, everyone can also be a scientist, in inverted commas. I think one of the realities we face today, from heritage science to the physical and the biological sciences, is that this element of participation now becomes so important. And then by participation, I think you also bring in new perspectives, so it becomes more interactive as a process together. So I think these are some of the fundamental changes we are seeing, what's happening today because of the new technologies and the popularization of social media tools that allows individuals to be keener participants of what in the past was actually done by the purview of institutions, whether it's political, whether it's cultural, whether it's religious. I mean, in the past, the best repository of knowledge and scientific advances was either the church, right? They held the medieval ages together in the time when Europe underwent its dark ages, but slowly, I think, advances brought about the popularization of science and technology. I think this is creating some profound consequences that we still haven't quite seen the full impact yet, but I think that's something that we have to think about, even in the case of if you were curating for a museum, and it's often said history is presented by the victors or written by the victors, but in today's context, I think citizens want to see both sides of the coin. They want to see the inherent contradictions, because the reality in society today is that society is full of contradictions. So we have to bring that out for the audience to fully appreciate. Are there any other questions on the presentation or on the area which Professor Nowotny has worked on? I thought I saw someone, or you are keen to go for your tea break. So maybe I would just ask one last question and perhaps bring a broader perspective to this. You were the founding member of the European Research Council, and that funds basic research, as well as you were the president right up to last month. Can I ask you a question on how you see the research agenda going forward changing with all these things that we talk about, and what are some of the recurring themes you see, as well as some of the new areas you should think the research community should be thinking about over the next 10, 20 years?
Thank you. So the European Research Council is funding what we call frontier research. And the term was chosen deliberately to go beyond this, because you spoke about dichotomy also, this dichotomy, pure research or basic research and applied research. In many areas of fast-moving science, this is a very blurred distinction to take. And frontier evokes, of course, Banneval's Bush Manifesto, Science, the Endless Frontier, but it also evokes the image of being at the forefront of what is known and what is yet unknown. Now, the basic philosophy of the ERC is different from what many other funding agencies in the world do. And we believe that it is the top researchers who know best where the frontier lies. In other words, we believe that neither we, the Scientific Council, nor the Commission, nor anyone else knows better than the top researchers where the frontier lies. So we give them no directions. It is no thematic priority, but we make sure that we find and fund the best of the best. We have a success rate of only 12%, and we have set up a peer review system, which is also the most international peer review system, with by now some 2,000 peer reviewers engaged. And excellence in that sense needs excellent reviewers to define excellence when you encounter it. What we do see, however, after 7 years now, is you cannot speak about a frontier of science by making dots on the landscape. We fund individuals. So we can see some clusters. So in physics, for instance, very much is one cluster is with regard to outer space. It's a very lively area, which has also some technological implications, of course. In other areas, we see, in the life sciences, we see, where the top people are and what the top people do. But then there are some interesting outliers. Individuals, and we are now beginning to analyze who are these individuals and what are they doing, who do unusual things. So I would say it's worthwhile to look both at clusters, and then you see this is really where the top people are working on, and to trust them. They know this is a problem that they think is exciting. It's also scientifically feasible, because there's no point in, you can dream up wonderful projects, but you don't have the means as yet to realize them. So this is feasible within a period of time, even if you don't know what you will find. But then there are some interesting outliers, and to see what are these people doing and give them the freedom. So don't look for, it's not a crystal ball. Don't look at it in terms of it will tell you where the next wave will be. But the clusters tell you something that is of interest, and the outliers tell you of spurts of creativity that may or may not lead somewhere.
Thank you very much. I think on that note, let us thank Professor Nowotny for a very interesting, insightful presentation. And join us for tea break. Thank you.